Hi, welcome back to another session of Peaceful Passages. This is going to be part 2 of an interview that I'm doing with my friend and mentor, David Zinner. He's the former executive director of the Gamaliel Institute, but also now is leading the Ben Zakkai Institute that I am so humbled and excited to be a part of. But we're going to continue on our conversation. We stopped last time in our interview talking about the very specialness of being in the Tahara room and the level of respect and care given to the deceased in the room. And so I kind of want to pick it up from there, because we were touching on the level of honor and respect of what happens in the Tahara room. And it's something that is very special and generally doesn't happen elsewhere. Because when you are helping somebody that can't help you in return, but you're doing something for somebody, we touched on a little bit on part 1, where they can't do anything for themselves. So one of the things that we do, why we do what we do, is we're trying to say the prayers and dress them to be ready to enter into heaven. And when we do that, because of the prayers and all of our intention to be a blessing, we receive not from the deceased, but a blessing in return, because we come together as a small group of people to help somebody to be dressed and ready to enter the next stage of life, so to speak. So I'll put it that way. So, and you have way more experience with working with people, different aspects in the Tahara room. The other thing that we touched on is sometimes we can't use water. How do we do Tahara without doing water? You want to touch on that for me?
Well, let me go back to what you were talking about previously, Theresa. You mentioned that that it's important for us to be able to show respect. And one of the ways that we do that is very unusual, and that is we actually talk to the person who's dead. And most of us don't go around talking to dead people, but in the Tahara room we do. We ask them for forgiveness for anything that we might have done afterwards, that we might have done to disrespect them or dishonor them. And at the beginning, we also might ask them to forgive us for anything that we might do. So, future tense as well as past tense. And this has an additional impact, and that is it reminds the people in the room that what we're doing has to be done carefully and with intent. Can't be done cavalierly. The unusual aspect of talking to someone who's died, and then the unusual aspect of saying to them, please forgive us for what if we do something that isn't appropriate. So that sort of sets a really good tone to make sure that people understand the seriousness of what we're doing.
Right. Well, and it's not, not taking it for granted. When we do go in, we ask, forgive us if we do something, and then forgive us at leaving if we done something. That, God forbid they don't end up on the floor, but it could have been something that, the shirt sleeve was a little hard to get on, so you had to move the arm a little bit out. It could be something minimal, but
right. Some of those minimal things are we try not to pass anything over the body.
Right.
Right.
And that's that's one of the hardest things to do, is because when we're doing a Tahara, the protocol is to not, like David was saying, not to pass anything over the deceased. You want to go around, and not getting into a biblical discussion about that. But one of the people on my Tahara team said, well, he says, we as human nature tend to want to pass over to do something to quickly get from point A to point B. God sometimes requires us to learn everything in the respect of going around and stop taking shortcuts. And when he said that, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that for me just kind of clinched it. But we so often are used to passing things over, it's like, here you go. But here's a deceased there, and out of respect and honor for them, to pass around. And
we also keep them covered as much as possible,
right.
And
modesty.
We're right, with respect for their modesty. So there's a number of things that we do that are done for their honor, but also to remind the people doing it that, that this is what it's all about. So, for example, it's very normal for someone on the Tahara team, especially a new person, to take a scissors, for example, and start to pass it over the body, and for the leader to say, nope, not how we do it. We go around and hand it to them. And then that reminds everybody, we're not dealing with a normal situation here, right? We're dealing with an extraordinary situation that, we have a different set of rules in our normal behavior.
Right. And it's interesting. One of the seasoned Tahara teammates that I have, it was so, for me, I think it was really cute because she was just ready to hand something over. She's like, no, and walked it around. So she's, training herself, which ended up training other people on the team. They're looking like, oh, that's right, we have to do this. So, it's beautiful to watch because it is a work in progress. And one of the things that you guys have always taught me is you do the best you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, no matter how hard you try, there's going to be some things you wish you could have done better. But, this isn't about perfection. This is about intention. This is about showing the care and respect and honor that the person deserves. And, one of the things that's interesting is the prayers that we use, are actually quite, what's the right word? We talk to God, right? Mm-hmm. We are being outrageous and saying to God, take care of this person, show them mercy. Well, who are we to tell God what to do, right? But we take on a role when we are part of the Tahara team because we're part of the Chevra Kadisha, and the Chevra Kadisha means the Holy Society. And there weren't that many societies in the Jewish community. There were a lot of societies in the Jewish community, but only one had the name, the Holy Society, right? So when we're in the Tahara room, we have a special obligation, but we sort of act like we have, we're representing the whole community and therefore advocating, that God have mercy on this person, and don't treat them, poorly. Treat them well. We're here supporting them. We want you to do the same thing. And another prayer that we do is we ask God to give us strength to do this work. So the prayers are really, really interesting when you look at them. And it's really helpful, I think, for Tahara teams to study prayers before they go into the room so they know what they're saying, because it's hard to focus on them while you're also caring for the person's body.
Right. Well, it's you. What you perform is what you practice. And the more you practice, when you perform something or follow through and do the physical act, the better it becomes. For me to do a Tahara inside the home, for me, I'm looking going, well, it's not always easy, but, I got that. We do that. And because being the hospice caregiver that I've been for the 34 years, bathing people in their home for 34 years, I could figure things out pretty easy. being in a funeral home, there's those elements that are more in place. But one of the things I did want to, bringing up the prayers, that we were talking about it at my friend's house where I'm staying at, about the prayers. One of the major differences between people that believe in Messiah compared to Jewish prayers. Jewish prayers generally are in books and they're on pages and they're easy for people to read and follow. We don't quite have that. So we can more shoot from the hip and saying a prayer. But we were discussing what I had found, the beauty of having the prayer written is everybody's on the same page. And the majority of the prayers that are written are community focused, not individual. It's about the community. And that's the part that is challenging, being a Tahara educator, leader, trying to train other groups that are in the fields where I'm working in on to be the community minded and see the blessing of having the things written down. Because there's certain songs that we can sing. A lot of people know the song Kadosh, the Mishaberach or Kaddish, and saying that in the Tahara room really brings the team together in an aspect where we do become one. And I think that's important because no matter who is doing what at the time where prayers are being said, if the team is trained and have heard the prayers before, that is the blessing of the Jewish religion, then we all can gather in and come together and either say it together or, have words, but you come together on a spiritual aspect as well. And it really draws closeness. And, there was one point where I was helping. There's a gentleman that died and was training the men's team at the time of the Tahara. But when it came time to do the water pouring aspect, because respectfully, we kept him covered. So I didn't have to see that aspect of the male. But I explained to them on how to do it. But because they've said the prayers again and again and again, I stood behind a screen and listened to all 5 of the men singing the prayers over the deceased. And I tell you, I wept like a baby. It was so beautiful because they were all in unison. And they did several of the songs. And I wept like a baby. And I shared that with them because that is one of the things that I want to encourage the Hebrew Roots movement to learn.
Yeah, so it's sort of interesting because the prayers that we use in Judaism were not codified and written down until 1626. Mm-hmm. And even then, they were only written in Hebrew and not really translated into English until much, much later. Probably 2000 and something was the first time I think I saw them and translated to English.
Yeah.
And so many groups were using prayers that were in Hebrew that you couldn't read. They were Xeroxes, copies, So a lot of groups were not doing the prayers because they couldn't find copies to read from. In the last 20 or so years, that's changed significantly with the number of published books that have the prayers in them and explanations about the prayers. So, that's an evolving thing. In the first Chaver Kadisha conference we did in 2003, it was so scattered. One of the things we did was we said to people, if you have, the text of the prayers that you use, bring them. We'll make copies for everybody. And then you can take home everyone else's copies too. and see if you want to modify your prayers. But with the publication of Chesed Shalemis by Stuart Kelman and Dan Fendel and Rick Light's book and a number of others, now we have published versions of the prayers, and it's much, much easier to understand. I really like what you described in terms of, your groups that are doing singing and praying in a way that in unison, which is something that I think we could use more of in Judaism.
Yeah, because generally in our circles, one of the things that doing the water ritual is the song Amazing Grace. And it's interesting is even if people that can't sing or even don't know the words, they'll hum along. And it's beautiful. And when that song is done, then maybe somebody else pick up a verse. But it's neat because there's that walking in with the right intention, walking in with wanting to be a blessing, that nobody, we might make mistakes, and if so, it's okay. Them knowing if they have to step back, it's okay, that they're not forced to do anything like that. There is that level of freedom, and they can relax a little bit going, okay, I can do this. And if I get nervous, then there's people around me that aren't judging me. There's been times where what we were saying before in the last session, that we generally don't allow family members in the Tahara room, because when we're there being a blessing to the deceased, we want as much peace and honor there as possible. And periodically I'll have somebody that say, well, I want to be in there. Let me go in there. Let me do this. We don't allow idle observation. If somebody is brand new that is like, I'm not quite sure, maybe it's like, okay, then one of the things that I like to do is have them be the reader, so they can read the prayers while we're doing different things to get them introduced, for them to see it's not so bad. And that I would encourage, if anybody does that, to do that on a fairly simple Tahara, not one that was gunshot wound or died at the hospital there's a whole myriad thing, car accidents,
brain aneurysm kind of thing.
Yeah, something that is fairly easy. You just died of old age or of a illness. But there's also being the lead times that if there's somebody that's in the room or wants to be in the room, that tends to be a little bit more of the aggressor, wants to control everything. And outside they're like, you're not doing that right. You're that. I mean, we all know somebody that would fit that bill. Being the lead, you have the ability to say, no, I would rather them stay outside and they can pray. And then, after we put the deceased in the casket, excuse me, they can come in and pray. And be a part of that aspect. But somebody that is that pushy and that controlling breaks the spirit of the respect and kavanah that happens in the room, because we are there for the deceased. We're not there for a power play. We're not there to control. We're not there to get our way. But I've had to tell a couple people no and be creative on how to say, I think you best serve this way. And when you can say it that way on, let's have you serve in this capacity over here, that tends to go a little bit better than I don't want you in there.
Yeah, the complement to that is the folks who are part of the team who are doing the Tahara. It's important for the leader to be looking at folks who will be the next leader.
Right.
right? How do you support and encourage people to say, okay, I think you've figured it out now. I think you've got it. Next time maybe you'll be my assistant, and then next time you'll take the lead, and I'll watch and I'll help you, but if you need help. But what we want to do is we want to, build their confidence and build leaders to be able to have more Tahara teams available to folks in more places.
Right. And it's, excuse me, it's interesting when I've traveled to different states, you see that. You understand those that kind of naturally just come in, and then you afterwards you kind of pull them aside and say, would you be willing? And it's interesting that once they're there, you see the people that are willing to pick it up. And there's been a couple teams that have been developed not under me, but through some of the stuff that I've learned from you and your institute and Ben Zakai, where they're picking up on the need. And it's encouraging to know that the work that we were doing is gonna move forward, whether, because we're not going to be here forever. We're part of that 100% mortality rate. So,
pick up on one of the other things you mentioned, Theresa. You mentioned at one point that you can ask the funeral director to help out with certain things. And I think it's really important for people who are doing this ritual washing to understand the role of the funeral director and what they can and can't do. So if you're not doing a home funeral, and you know that the person is an organ donor or a tissue donor or had an autopsy or, whatever the situation is, you can ask the funeral director to tell you what the state of the body is. You can ask the funeral director to help you with sewing up things that need to be sewn up. You can ask them to not, for example, put a sticker on the body bag that says "Do not touch," just because the person was an organ donor. Right. So it's important to have a close working relationship with the funeral director to be willing to go into the funeral home before the Tahara team comes, so that you and the funeral director can assess the situation. Communication is really important.
Yeah, and it's kind of nice because there's most funeral directors are willing to work with the I would say one leader on the Tahara team. Don't have the whole team go and meet the funeral director. It's not that it couldn't be done, but I really want to discourage that, because having one person talk to the funeral director is better than more than one, I'll just say. But knowing also what the team lead is comfortable with, what they're not comfortable with. So if you're not comfortable taking out any medical devices, or you're not comfortable, maybe there's an open wound on how to stitch them up, different things like that, you can ask the funeral director. Because there's been times that I walked into a Tahara room and the deceased, I will just say, needs help a little bit more advanced than I can do. So at that particular point, because they have come back to me and said, well, we weren't sure on how much that you wanted to do. So we had the deceased exactly to be here exactly how they arrived. We are willing to do whatever you need to be done, but we wanted to give you the opportunity to take care of them first. And whatever you're not comfortable with, we'll take care of. And I find that being most funeral homes. But that's talking about a Hever Kadisha team that you yourself would want in your area, is have the lead start talking to different funeral homes and building that rapport, so that way each lead knows what is expected from the other.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And, there is a role, I think, for the Tahara team to take a tour of the facility. Right. We're not at the level of coordinating on a particular death, but take a tour of the facility, know what the back end looks like. Everybody looks at the front, the front end of the funeral home, but look at the back end. You want to know, how does the table work? Does it tilt? Does it have brakes? Is there a lift? How does the lift work? Where are the supplies kept? Where is the emergency eye wash? Where are the bathrooms? So that's an important thing for the group to tour. But I think you're exactly right. When we're talking about a single case where, you want to know, what are we going to do about this? Then I think it's good to have the leader meet with the funeral director and try and figure it out.
Right. And one of the things also is finding 1, 2, or 3, depending on the size of your congregation and location of the members, is have work with individual funeral homes to work with them almost exclusively. It doesn't mean they're the only one, but if you can work with them exclusively, then you can start making agreements, not contracts, agreements that if somebody passes away, you'll use their funeral home. And so that way you have that rapport. So that way you're not just bouncing around different funeral homes, because that could be stressful on the team. And, with doing these kind of rituals, it's nice to have a little bit of the continuity to know what's expected, where everything is at. And,
And Theresa, it's also good to know what space you'll be able to use. Often funeral directors would assume that we want to do a tahara in the same room where they do embalming,
right.
Which can be very uncomfortable with the smell of the formaldehyde or,
Right.
all kinds of interesting equipment that's around. So finding a room that they might have available, which has floor drains because we're going to be pouring water,
Right.
And which has good ventilation. So not every funeral home will be able to have all those things, but it's good to try and find out.
Right. And it's important, you have that aspect, or in the viewing room where there's no water available. But we're coming to the end of this particular session. And I want to, again, thank you, David, so very, very much. There's always still so much that we could talk about when it comes with tahara. But I thank you for being a guest on this episode. And thank you all for joining us with the Peaceful Passages. And till we see you again, God bless and take care.